I used to work as a police detective in the Philippines, and I have a weird case that still does not sit right with me. It does not really work like it does in America. Local police departments don't really have detectives in the same way. The local police respond first, then the CIDG, which is a regional unit inside the National Police Force. They handle the more serious crimes, the kind of thing that does not remain in one city. Then you have the MBI, which I suppose is a little more like the FBI. I was an agent in the MBI. We stepped in because the DOJ authorized it the second they heard about the first killing. The body of a victim was found in a condition that might cause panic across the entire country if it got out, and so we were to deal with it swiftly and efficiently. The body was pulled up from the Pasig River by the Coast Guard. The ferry operator spotted what he at first thought was a floating pile of trash in the early hours of the morning. Once he got a little bit closer, he realized that there was a human arm hanging out of a trash bag that had been dumped somewhere further upstream and floated downwards. When he saw this, he immediately contacted the Coast Guard, which started the chain reaction response. I did not personally witness this body being pulled up, but I did get to examine it up close once the water had been drained. It smelled foul, but from the looks of it, the victim had not been dead for more than a couple of days. The most remarkable thing about the body, and the medics confirmed this multiple times, was that the body had been drained entirely of blood. Not a single damn drop was left, give or take. Well, kind of. You can't truly drain a body of blood no matter how hard you try, because specks of it pool up, but this is about as close as you can get. The first thing that caught my eye, and the eyes of everyone else, was the puncture wounds around the neck area. There were 2 sets of these around both sides of the neck and went a few inches deep. Medical staff initially determined that these wounds were caused and were consistent with teeth puncture wounds, although later they retracted this. This was mostly from the outward appearance. By their accounts initially, it seemed as if these wounds were from much sharper teeth than a human's incisors, possibly even incisors sharpened manually. They couldn't say this confidently though, and after inspecting the wound further, they thought it possible and more likely that the penetration was carried out by using surgical tools. This confusion and difficulty in figuring this out was because the body had been floating in the river. The rapid decay from the water made the post-mortem much more difficult. I think the most interesting thing was that these puncture wounds were not the cause of death, and neither was the loss of blood. See, the body had very clear ligature marks that the perpetrator was not able to cover up. It seemed they had tried to apply some kind of makeup or something else, but most of it washed off in the river. After strangulation, it seems that the victim was bled manually by wounds inflicted to key arteries. These wounds were determined to have been inflicted post-mortem due to passive bleeding and little to no tissue infiltration and no arterial spray. Medical staff suggested that the body may have been hung in order to use gravity to help drain the blood, but they could not be 100% confident of this. They thought this because of the way the blood had settled in the body. When someone normally dies, the remaining blood pools in the lowest parts of the body, but in this one, it did not match the position in which the body was found in the river. The blood looked like it had shifted after death, like the guy had been upside down or hanging before he ended up in the water. A few weeks passed by after that, with very little evidence to go on. We were hoping it was a one-off by some sick and crazed freak, but we did not get that lucky, unfortunately. This body was not found in the river this time, and was almost worse. The body was actually found in a nearby apartment in a run-down part of the city. Crime happens around here all the time. Lots of petty crime, theft, and killings. This would have been chalked up as another one of those, if not for the unmistakable signs that linked it to the first one. It was sloppy, really sloppy. The first killing had obviously been meticulously planned out, but this one seemed like a heat-of-the-moment killing. The victim's cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. 1.45 round penetrated the skull and entered the brain and killed the victim instantly. There was definitely a sign of a struggle. The place was a trash heap. Furniture was broken. Glass and other things were smashed and tossed around the room. By the signs of dry blood on the floor, it looked like the attacker had been sticked with something first. After that, he must have shot the victim dead. What he did after that was just bizarre. The victim had those same puncture wounds on both sides of his neck. They were exactly the same as the last one, and it was clear this time, since this body had not been rotting in the river, that the marks were too consistent to be teeth marks. He had taken some kind of surgical tool and made 2 identical sets of punctures in the neck on both sides. There was no draining of blood this time. He very clearly rushed this part. The body was what I can only describe as completely mutilated to an extent. See, the perpetrator had taken what we could only infer was a machete at the time and started trying to cut up the body. He wasn't trying to remove body parts to dump separately somewhere. Oh no. Whoever did this had taken this machete and started removing chunks of skin. He had sawed off half of the victim's belly, and the remains of it was only found later, dumped outside in a garbage bag. Other pieces of flesh had been carved out, and similar puncture wounds to the ones present on the neck were spread throughout the body. Marks from a sharp instrument present on the upper thigh of the victim also suggested that the killer had attempted to saw through the legs of the victim. He had gotten through the muscle and the fat part way, but then just stopped. The victim was left to bleed after death, and the perpetrator had fled for some unknown reason. There were even a set of bloody footprints trailed across the apartment. We knew for sure that this was the same guy. There was no way it could possibly be anyone else. The details of the first murder were withheld beyond the basics and never circulated in any media, and so no one but the original killer could have known about the puncture marks. So even though this was sloppy and not all that similar to the first one, we knew it was the same guy. Things went by pretty quietly for another few weeks, until we got a bit of a tip-off from a local. There was this guy who lived in a farmhouse just outside of the city, all on his own. He was usually pretty isolated and kept to himself. He only ever came into the city to sell and trade, but even that was sporadic, and he never socialized with anyone. The guy who gave us the tip-off said he was completely different this time around. He came into a store, and as soon as he stepped foot in there, he smelled like metal and cow shit. Despite his work, the tip-off guy told me that he was usually the cleanest guy you've ever met, never smelt bad once in his life. Anyway, so he was completely on edge from the first moment that he walked in. He was itching at his neck and kept putting his hands in his pockets and feeling for something before taking them back out. He came into the store, desperate for something, but the tip-off guy could not work out what he wanted. He was going on and on about new gardening tools and digging, and then said he needed fertilizer too. He said he needed to dig up his entire field, that he needed tools and fertilizer. Then he started talking about how his carpet stinks and he needs something stronger than bleach to clean it. The guy who told me this said he could not stick to a topic for more than 5 seconds. He apparently kept switching back and forth and talking about different things. The guy who gave up the tip said he chuckled at him and asked if he was okay, and when he did, the farmhouse guy lunged at him and grabbed him by the shirt collar. When the guy who gave the tip pushed him away and got angry, he pulled out a .45 pistol and started waving it around, but he never shot it. The guy who gave the tip got scared and asked him what the hell he wanted, but he just started ranting for a good 5 minutes. He started telling him how he needed to be careful, otherwise he would be his next sacrifice. That's the exact word that the farmhouse guy used. The tip-off guy said he went off on this giant rant about how he was persecuted and how people wanted him dead just for existing, and all sorts of other crazy bullshit. After that, he ran outside of the store, and he did not see him again. At this point, we could not directly link him to the 2 murders that had happened, but we had probable cause to go and pay him a visit. Even if nothing came of it, at least one more crazy person would not be free to just explode whenever the urge came over them. I drove down to that farmhouse with 2 of my trusted colleagues who were armed. We weren't exactly sanctioned to do a SWAT-style raid. The second that we got there, we knew that something was wrong. In this guy's car, it was tipped over. He had crashed it into a ditch and flipped it, and it had just been left there. All of his animals were free outside of their pen. They were not inside fences or anything anymore. They were wandering into the road and into surrounding fields. There were a few pigs lying dead on the grass, as well as a cow and a sheep. We did not have time to inspect the corpses, so had no idea what killed them at the time. We later found out that they had been cut around the throat and left to bleed out. We were incredibly cautious approaching the main house, and I gave a few loud knocks and announced myself and my intentions. We had no response, but we did not need to break down the door or make any show of force. The door was already open, and all I had to do was nudge it slightly for it to swing wide open. It wasn't a gigantic house, but it had a second floor. The place was really, really creepy. Not anything I had seen before, especially not in a farmhouse. For a start, the place stunk of something rotten, some kind of rotten meat. There were all sorts of things mounted on the wall. Pig heads, cow heads, and other shit too, but these were not professionally mounted. They were just hammered into the wall with a nail or two and left to just fester and rot. He had a lot of weird objects around the bottom floor associated with mysticism, I guess you would call it. Candles lit on a table with various religious symbols, and then other occult stuff that I did not really understand. His refrigerator smelled horrible too. It was stuffed to the brim with bits of meat packaged up really poorly in plastic bags or like clear Ziploc bags. It was all from animals, but had obviously been kept in there for a very long time. I had never seen maggots crawling around in a refrigerator until that day. He had pots and pans filled with a broth that had gone a really murky brown. It was completely still and had become thick and congealed, and I could not look at it for more than a second. My colleagues with me were desperate to leave. I must mention that we did have backup nearby in case of an emergency due to the recent killings and the evidence and gut feeling that we had. We could hear some kind of banging or stomping coming from upstairs, so we walked up there as quietly as we could. There were only 2 rooms on the top floor, one of them being the toilet. From a quick glimpse, I could see that it was blocked with tissue paper and plastic that had gone this green color. We did not have time to take a closer look, and I was not interested anyway. The other room was not that big. When we walked in, we found the man at the other end sat on this really beat up old mattress with weird symbols hung above the wall. He was sat, but had his head down on the bed, and there was something else on the bed with him. At first I could not tell properly, but I eventually made out that it was a chicken. The chicken was already dead and not making any sounds or struggling. We watched for a couple of seconds before making any noise, and it looked like he was biting this thing. But he kept getting what I can only describe as stuck. He could not pull his teeth up and out, and had to pull a few times before he got frustrated and started shouting underneath his breath and smashing the chicken down onto the mattress. At this point he noticed us, and we told him to drop to the ground. We were worried that he still had his .45, but thankfully it did not seem like he did. He stood there and would not listen to us. He started going on this tirade about how we were discriminating against his people. He actually grabbed a crucifix and started thrusting it out towards us and telling us to stay away from him, that we were the real demons and not him. We asked him once again very nicely to get down on the ground and cooperate. He started to crouch down on the floor very slowly with his hands behind his head, but as he started kneeling, he all of a sudden just bolted in our direction. He had his hands outwards and was screaming some sort of war cry and tried to jump to get closer. My colleague shot him once before he could get too close, and just like that, he was dead. One thing that sticks in my mind from this case is what this crazy bastard did to himself. Those puncture wounds that we found on the body that were made to look like bite marks. He hid these marks on his own body. We are not entirely sure what instrument he used, but he gave himself fake bite wounds, and his teeth too. His teeth were all messed up because he had taken something and tried to file down his teeth to make them sharper. Of course, in doing this, he ended up damaging the rest of his teeth entirely. It looked incredibly painful. He actually broke off one of his front 2 teeth trying to achieve this. His gums were almost entirely receded, and all of the teeth looked like they could fall off at just a touch. We are not entirely sure what he was trying to achieve with the chicken, but it did have bite marks embedded into it. We were able to match his DNA to the previous 2 crime scenes. To this day, I just don't understand it. We did find a manifesto of sorts in his room, but it was more just a series of disconnected ramblings. The only parts that we could really figure out were these parts. He spoke about how one night in his sleep, he was visited by an aswang, which is basically the Filipino version of a vampire, but not quite the same. It can shapeshift and take on many forms, but are known to suck the blood of people that it comes across. He wrote about how this aswang came to him and bit him, and he said it turned him into one. He said that from that day, he had a mission. He talked about how he had to make it spread. That is exactly what he wrote. I have seen some crazy things in all of my years, and thankfully I am retired now, but that is the most disturbing thing I ever had to deal with. After the second killing, it wasn't as easy to suppress the details in the media, and the city was in a frenzy, talking about how they were being terrorized by an aswang. I'm just not sure what happened or why this man believed that he was some kind of a vampire. He was so wrapped up in his delusions that he thought that he could turn over people, but that did not make sense either, because he killed them and then faked the bites. He must have known that he was just killing these people, or maybe that's what the practice on the chicken and the filing of his teeth was for. Maybe he was stepping up to do something else. Either way, I'm just glad it was over, and that I don't have to deal with cases like that anymore. Sorry that this was a little bit long. I did not want to leave anything out. Hey, hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you want to hear more, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment because it lets YouTube know you like the content and helps more people to see these videos. My next big goal for the channel is 100,000 subscribers, and as a celebration, I will be doing a Q&A video once we hit that goal. Thank you. And back to the stories. I have so many stories to tell, I almost don't think they would all fit. My first experiences, I would have to say, started after we moved into a house we lived in for about 7 years. I was 5 years old. The house was located in between the foothills and mountains of California in a small town called Northfork. The house was pretty big, a 2-story with 11.3 acres of land that had 2 rivers. The house was made from trees that was cut down on its own property. From day one, that house gave off an ominous, foreboding, and just downright creepy feeling. I never in my whole life slept in that house without something happening, and I always had to have some sort of light source. I would say that my first experiences there was the footsteps. My room was the first one downstairs and down the hall. I would hear footsteps start above the kitchen. It's where the loft was located. Not my parents' room, mind you, but the loft, and hear them come down the stairs, down the hall, and they would stop at my bedroom door. Once in a while I would see a shadow walk past. A few times I got up the courage to peer out the door, seeing nothing. Other than the footsteps, I would hear whispering. Many whisperings, and I was never able to make out the words. I would ask my parents almost every night if they had come downstairs for anything, and it was almost always a no. One night, I was laying with my back facing my bedroom door and staring at my wall, making little shadows with my hands from my nightlight, when I heard the footsteps again. This time they almost seemed to drag. I stopped moving and pulled the blanket up over my shoulder and listened. As they reached the hall, a small scratching sound went down the wall, like someone was dragging their hand along the wall while they walked. I heard my door move across the carpet, and all of a sudden this looming feeling of, I don't know, just a heaviness fell over me. I felt like I could not breathe, it was so thick. I held my breath to listen, and then I rolled over and saw nothing. I sat up in bed and stared at my now fully open door and saw nothing that I had felt behind me. I crawled into my little brother's bed in the room next to mine and slept with him that night. Other than those, I would hear screams coming from upstairs when my parents were gone. Me and my little brother would look upstairs and creep up them and of course find nothing. In the middle of the day, it was just very scary to experience at young ages. There were also aberrations of a young girl and a young boy dressed in the garb of probably pioneer days. The girl wore a white dress with the ruffles around the throat, and she was always extremely mad, always angry, and she scared me. She scared me so bad. I would see her reflections in the windows on the stairs. I never could be in the living room at night without the light above the stairs being on. The boy, on the other hand, just seemed normal. He had a hat, I remember that. Not a hat like now. It was a little floppy and brown, the kind shown in the picture. The only time I ever heard him talk was a few days before we had to move. He said, "Please don't go," and vanished. Another few experiences I had happened down at one of the rivers. Me and my little brother went down to play one day, and our dogs went with us. Before we went around the turn, the dogs had run off in the brush, and my brother ran on ahead a little ways. I stopped in my tracks, seeing a man in a cowboy hat sitting on top of a horse. He was wearing dusty boots with a holster around his waist with a gun. His eyes were very hard, and he had a scowl on his face. I remember calling to my brother, who only looked at me confused, but looked to where I was staring, and I remember seeing his face almost drain. He ran over to me, and I put my arm around him while pushing him behind me. I remember yelling up at him that my dad would not be happy with him trespassing on our property and that he better leave, but I felt this cold push against my chest and nothing but pure fear. I turned my brother around and told him to run. I walked backwards until he was out of my sight before I turned my back on him to run for myself. We told my dad, who went to check things out, and he never found the man, or any signs of a horse walking around in the sand of the path. Me and my brother have heard whispers and giggles and talking around us many times while we played in the river. I heard yelling and gruff men voices and other things as well. When we had to sell the house was when we finally got to learn some stuff about the history of the land. There were some spots on the property where I felt safe and completely at peace, and other spots I would never touch ever again. I would have constant bad dreams that still haunt me to this day of our backyard, of the loft, my room, the stairs. Dreams of large black dogs with red eyes that circled the house and killing my parents before they could make it to the front door from the car. The first, but not the last time I dreamed of these dogs, but what we learned was interesting to what I had seen. The land before was a home to the Mono Native Americans who had lived there before. I found many arrowheads in my time. There was said to be a burial ground somewhere on the property. Personally, I think it's one of the spots that I felt safe in. On top of a hill that overlooked our house was a perfect encircling of trees. A perfect circle. Me and my brother used to have picnics there. Another thing we learned was that the river used to be penned for gold. It was a train station, and it also held an old saloon/brothel. It explains some things, I think. After we sold our house, my family felt a tragedy. My little brother died after a car wreck where my father's truck went against a diesel that fled the scene to leave behind my dad to take the entire rap. The 3 months I spent in the hospital left me relearning how to walk while high off morphine at the age of 12. I was told my brother was dead on the 3rd day in. I was wheeled up to his room in my bed the day before they told me, so I could visit him because I was hysterical and I had to see him. They already knew he was dead but did not tell me. That night, I was alone in my room. I didn't cry, and I feel horrible for not crying, but my entire nerve and emotional system was numb from everything that they had been pumping into my veins. I don't know the exact time, but I know it was way after midnight. I had a balloon fly around my room. It had a weight on it. It was standing stationary beside my bed the entire day, but that night, it flew around my room. I cried then. I felt this warm presence, but at the same time, I could not feel it. It felt like giggles, happy giggles, as my balloon floated around and around in circles. The next morning I woke up to it being left at the right side end of my bed. It was the right side that my body was injured. I think it was my little brother. After that, all of my experiences have been mostly demonic. If anyone has any interest in those, or not sleeping, let me know. So, after everything else that followed after I was released from the hospital and from CPS, I moved back in with my parents. At the time, we lived in a small camper off my great-aunt's property, and after she moved to the next town over, we got to take over the mobile home that she lived in. We were out in the country outskirts of the town that I live in now, and it was surrounded by pistachio orchards and a big river. My room was on the complete opposite end of the mobile home from my parents, and they did not really seem to have much time for me. The death was hard on my brother. They were never really mentally there afterwards. Not until probably a couple years ago did they realize that they lost about 6 years with me. So I was lonely, as anyone else would be. My little brother was my best friend. We went everywhere together, did everything together. I spent a lot of my time crying, and I was not even allowed to speak about him in earshot of my parents because they would go ballistic. One night as I was crying, I felt a soft, warm hand on my shoulder and a weight sitting on my bed. I told my mom I was sorry, but when I rolled over, I did not see anyone there. But the weight was still implanted on my bed, and I still felt the warmth of a loving mother. I looked around, but I still could not see anything. No ball of light, no aberration, nothing. So I asked really softly who it was, and a delicate woman's voice whispered back, Elaine or Ellen. I could never figure out what name was said. So for the 1.5 years that I lived there, I felt her. Some nights my room gave off such a fiery hate aura that I had to sleep in the recliner in the living room because it scared me so bad. And other times it was that warm, soothing feeling I had experienced that first night. Why they only gave information on deaths on the location after you move away from a place, I will never understand. But a long while ago, one of the previous owners to the land, they were a young couple. The husband, a horrible alcoholic, and beat his wife constantly. Ended up killing her, so I believe it was her. One night I was doing my homework in the living room. My dad was passed out from taking a bunch of pills, and my mom was passed out from drinking. I was eating something, a sandwich or cereal, maybe mac and cheese, I don't know, whatever I made myself when I heard my name. I remember sitting up and setting my food and math book down and standing out of the recliner and turned around to face the kitchen to see if my parents needed help or something because, well, alcohol and drugs, they can barely walk. No one there. I stared at the empty kitchen when I heard a loud whisper in my ear call my name. I spun around and my light was on in my bedroom. For some reason I did not feel any fear, so I walked in slowly, my eyes wide open looking for anything. I sat down on my bed and watched a cobweb above my light. It was still. I asked if it was her and to show me a sign so that I could see her. The cobweb moved softly, like someone gently blew on it. I asked her if she needed help. It moved again. I asked her if she wanted me to find someone. It held still. I asked a few more questions but got nothing. I asked her if she knew she was dead. It was hesitant but moved. I asked her if she wanted help over. It blew so hard, half of it fell. After I asked, my heart started to pound like mad, and the feeling in the room just seemed very thick, warm and very thick. I was only 13 at this time. I wasn't exactly sure what to say or do. I told her she was not alive anymore and that her time had come to pass. I told her not to be afraid, that people were waiting for her and would help lead her home. I told her to see a white light to go home. She was safe now, and some more stuff that I just can't remember at all. All of a sudden, I felt this hug envelop me. It squeezed me and my entire soul felt full, and I had tears streaming down my cheeks, and then, like that, it was gone. My light was off, my room was dark, it felt extremely empty, and for the first time in a year I felt completely alone. For some people, it's really hard to explain. When you constantly feel near something, you know something's there, and then there to be absolutely nothing. It's a very empty feeling. I remember crying, sobbing really, for her, because once again, I was all alone. I never had any other experiences in that house. We moved into an apartment in the town, and my mom ended up throwing my dad in jail for domestic abuse. While he was in jail, she started dating the neighbor. He gave off a very untrusting feeling. His eyes seemed too bright and way too quick to dart around, like he was keeping something to himself. I ended up living with my grandparents because I could not stand him and my mom. After everything settled and my parents worked it out, me and my dad ended up moving back in with my mom, who had moved to a different apartment, the one that I live in now. The apartment's owners before her was her ex-boyfriend's parents, and the guy's mom told my mom to salt around the house and to hang crosses and to take precautions, and my mom did not. Lucky me, right? So my room is the one in the back on the left. It was not clean enough by my mom's standards for me to live in yet, so for the first couple of months, I stayed in the living room. After some serious cleaning, I finally got to move my furniture from my grandparents' house into my new room. The first few things I noticed was my room never felt safe to me. It felt like it wanted me out. It felt very unwelcoming, and it was always cold. Even today, there are grey handprints and smudges on my walls that are unscrubbable. Now, here is where the true terrors of my life began. There was a ton of noises, breathing, steps, scratchings, growling, whispers, laughs, cursing, yelling, lots of things like that. My clothes in my closet would move. Things in my room would move or disappear, only to reappear elsewhere. I had no pets at the time. My bed was located underneath my window, straight across from my closet. My closet doors were removed long ago, and I can see into it just fine. I swear on my brother's grave, I watched things move in there. I saw the shadows leak out. I saw the hands holding the closet frame, and I felt them. I ended up sleeping with a lamp in my closet and a lamp on in my room. At night, I would hear scratching underneath my bed. I had a daybed, steel framework, and the underside was this strong nylon with the support bars underneath for the mattress. I would hear nails scratch the nylon and feel it move under me. On more than one night, my blankets were pulled under my bed, and I watched my bedroom door close by itself. I ended up sleeping in the recliner in the living room for 8 months. Then it started following me to the living room. The shadows would stay in the hallway where it was dark and reach out and stretch to me. My parents were fed up with me sleeping in the living room and told me to use my own room. That's why I had one, so I had to go back to my own room. By this time, I had gotten a young cat from a moving neighbor. She ended up going crazy, literally crazy. She would seem almost possessed. She hissed and scratched, and when I got her, she was fine. She would not leave my room. She scratched up my walls where the handprints were. She tore apart my posters that covered them, and she would sit in front of my closet with her back arched, hissing. One day she got outside, and I never saw her ever again.